Only on Fox tonight, where is Alexis Ware? This mom of two has not been seen in more than a year. Now, Ware disappeared from Anderson County last January after pulling out of the 7-Eleven gas station there on Highway 29. It's a story we've been covering from the start.
And only on Fox tonight, Alexis's mom tells our Berkeley Cromer that she has not given up hope.
Think about her all day long, all night, every waking moment.
Alexis Ware's mom, Alberta, continues fighting in her absence.
It's been 15 months.
Investigators have found few concrete leads.
It's painful to even think about. I sit and I think about her laughter, her smile.
Alberta knows her daughter would not willingly leave.
Alexis wouldn't stay away from her children. Alexis wouldn't, she has never been away from her children. She has never went one day without calling me.
Alexis was last seen speeding off from the 7-Eleven gas station on Highway 29 in Anderson last January. Her red sports car disappearing into the dark of night.
She felt like her life was in danger. She was saying that she wasn't going to see her 30th birthday. And so, you know, when you think about it, she was right.
She says Alexis had been getting threats in the weeks leading up to her disappearance.
Her intuition told her that something was going to happen to her, and it did.
Alexis told her that someone in a black truck had been following her for weeks.
If it's somebody that she knows, you know, they didn't even think about her children. How would this impact their life, you know, for their own selfish reasons, you know, wanting to do something bad to my daughter, and I'm just trying to understand, you know, why.
The Anderson County Sheriff's Office and the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division have combed through miles of terrain, searching for the missing mom of two. Her car was found in McCormick County, but despite their best efforts and the FBI being brought in to assist, still no clues have led to finding Alexis.
Night draped itself over rural South Carolina like a shroud. The moon hid behind clouds. Only the faint glow of distant headlights dared to pierce the darkness. Somewhere deep in McCormick County, a lone road wound through thick trees and overgrown underbrush. Mud squished under wheels. The forest whispered. A red 2019 Honda Accord lay abandoned on a dirt stretch, half hidden by the brush, its tires caked with earth. The windows were dark, the engine cold. Inside rested her purse, her phone, a small bag of clothing, and the haunting emptiness of absence. No footprints led away, no sign of struggle, no indication of what had transpired. The car had been left in that spot as though someone had vanished mid-journey, leaving behind echoes in the night. That car would become the final marker in a case that would haunt investigators, fracture loved ones, and ignite demands for accountability. It would serve not just as evidence, but as a question left open in the darkness. She was 29, a mother of two, a dreamer, and she was gone. That night, the fabric of her life unraveled. The search began, but what followed would prove more twisted, filled with whispers, dead ends, half-truths. No confession, no body. Only an absence that stretched into years. In the hours that followed, law enforcement would arrive. They would assess the vehicle. They would take fingerprints. They would catalog items left behind. They would call in experts. Yet even as they worked, the deeper mystery would take root. How does someone disappear so completely from a car left in the woods? As dawn approached, the silence only deepened the dread. For this was not a simple lost person case. This was a question of something darker. And as the investigations unfolded, one truth became clear. Some mysteries are not solved. They haunt. Before her name became the center of a statewide search, Alexis Ware was known for her laughter. She was 29 years old, a mother of two, a woman who had built her world through grit and grace. Those who knew her said she had the kind of presence that filled a room, confident, warm, effortlessly magnetic. She grew up in South Carolina, deeply rooted in family and faith, and even though life had thrown its share of struggles her way, she met each one with quiet determination. Her friends described her as ambitious. She was building her online presence, posting beauty tutorials and motivational clips on social media, hoping to launch a small business, a boutique, or a beauty brand of her own. She wanted independence, a chance to create something lasting, not just for herself, but for her children. Alexis had dreams of moving to Atlanta, where she believed bigger opportunities awaited her. It was a vision she spoke about often, a home filled with light, her kids laughing in the background, and her name attached to something she had built from nothing. But beneath that ambition, there were shadows most people never saw. She carried herself like she was untouchable, but those closest to her knew she'd been hurt before, by life, by love, by disappointment. Her relationship with T.J. Patterson, the father of her youngest child, was complicated. They weren't together romantically anymore, but they co-parented. There was tension, the kind that lingers when two people share history but no longer share trust. Friends said they'd sometimes argue, sometimes reconcile, and then drift apart again. Still, Alexis tried to keep things stable for the sake of her children. Family was everything to her. She visited her mother often, bringing the kids over on weekends, sharing meals, and talking late into the night. Her mother, Althea, described her as protective, not just of her kids, but of everyone she loved. Yet in the weeks before she disappeared, Althea noticed something change in her daughter. Alexis seemed nervous, paranoid even. She mentioned that she felt like she was being followed, that her phone was ringing with calls from blocked numbers, that strangers were showing up in places she didn't expect them to be. She began to look over her shoulder more often, lock her doors faster, and text her family about her whereabouts with unusual urgency. Those warnings sounded like fear, but no one imagined they'd lead to something worse. Alexis had told her mother she didn't believe she'd live to see her 30th birthday. It was a chilling confession, one her family didn't take lightly. But how do you protect someone from a threat you can't see? Her loved ones tried to reassure her, telling her she was probably just overthinking, that maybe it was stress, that she needed rest. Alexis nodded, but she didn't seem convinced. Something in her spirit had shifted, as if she was already bracing herself for something she couldn't quite name. By late January 2022, Alexis was juggling her business plans, motherhood, and the delicate balance of co-parenting. On January 30th, she spent the day visiting her mother before driving back toward Greenville. Later that evening, she arranged to meet TJ at a 7-Eleven gas station in Anderson County. The plan was simple, a quick exchange of the kids before she followed him to his mother's house, where they'd spend the night. Surveillance footage shows her car pulling in, the handover smooth and calm. Then both cars left the station, one behind the other. What happened next would fracture everything. Because somewhere between that 7-Eleven and McCormick County, Alexis Ware vanished. Her red Honda Accord would later be found on a dirt road, its doors locked, her belongings untouched, but her body, her phone, her voice were gone. No one saw her again. Her dreams of a boutique, her hopes for Atlanta, her laughter in her children's ears, all frozen in time, waiting for answers that would never come easily. And as investigators began piecing together her final movements, one question grew heavier by the hour. Who or what was Alexis running from? The days before Alexis vanished were filled with quiet alarms, subtle, almost invisible signals that something in her world was slipping into danger. To most of those around her, she appeared to be holding everything together. But beneath the surface, unease had taken root. Friends recalled her becoming distant. Her energy, once bright and playful, had dulled into something cautious, even fearful. She stopped answering certain calls. She avoided unfamiliar cars that seemed to linger near her apartment complex. She double-checked locks. She'd park her car in different spots, as though trying to confuse someone who might be watching. There were moments when her phone would buzz and she'd go still, eyes narrowing, body tensing, as if the name or number on the screen carried a weight only she understood. To her family, she started saying things that made less and less sense, but carried more and more dread. She mentioned being followed. She said she was receiving strange messages from blocked numbers. She even told her mother, "I feel like my time is running out." Those words hung in the air like a bad omen. Althea, her mother, tried to soothe her, but the look in Alexis's eyes told her that whatever fear had taken hold wasn't imagined. It was lived, present, and closing in. She began talking about changing her appearance, her hair, her nails, even her routine. Small details that suggested she wanted to be less recognizable. On social media, her posts became sporadic. Her once lively online presence, the one that had fueled her growing following, suddenly quieted. She told friends she needed a break, that she was tired, that something didn't feel right. There was also tension between Alexis and the father of her youngest child, TJ Patterson. Though police would later clear him as a suspect, those who knew them both described a relationship that had long been strained. They had tried to make co-parenting work, but arguments flared often. They were trying to coexist in the thin space between former lovers and reluctant partners in responsibility. Some close to Alexis said she didn't always trust him completely. Others said she confided fears that she was being set up or watched by people connected to him. But none of that could ever be proven, and speculation would later cloud what little truth remained. She also started doing something unusual, giving instructions. She told her family what to do if something happened to her, how to take care of her children, who to call, where to look. At the time, it sounded paranoid, maybe even melodramatic. But in hindsight, it was the behavior of a woman who knew something was coming. The final weekend before she disappeared, Alexis drove to her mother's house with her kids. Those who saw her said she seemed distracted, her mind elsewhere. She talked about wanting to move away, to start fresh. She stayed longer than usual, lingering as though she didn't want to leave. When she finally got into her car that Sunday, her mother watched her drive off, unaware it would be the last time she'd ever see her daughter. Hours later, Alexis texted that she was on her way to meet TJ to drop off the kids. It was an ordinary exchange, one that should have marked just another routine evening. But for reasons no one fully understands, she didn't come home. Some who have studied the case believe Alexis was already in a state of hypervigilance, caught between fear and instinct. Maybe she felt pursued. Maybe she was meeting someone she didn't trust. Or maybe, as others quietly suggest, she had uncovered something she shouldn't have. Whatever the truth, the pattern was clear. Something had frightened her deeply enough to alter her behavior, isolate her from her circle, and put her in survival mode. And when she got behind the wheel of that red Honda Accord on January 30th, it wasn't just another drive. It was the beginning of her disappearance. By the time investigators would trace her route, that road would lead to more questions than answers. The red flags had been there all along, waving like warnings in the dark. But no one could have predicted that within hours, Alexis Ware would vanish into the night and leave behind a silence that would echo for years, with routine and ended in a riddle. The air in Anderson County was cool, the kind that carries the faint scent of rain and gasoline. The sun had already slipped beyond the tree line when Alexis Ware's red 2019 Honda Accord pulled into the parking lot of a 7-Eleven gas station on Highway 29. The surveillance cameras captured it all: the stillness, the ordinary hum of cars coming and going, and the quiet movement of a mother just trying to complete a handover of her children. Moments later, another car arrived. A dark vehicle belonging to T.J. Patterson, the father of her youngest child. Their plan that evening was simple: meet at the gas station, hand over the kids, and then Alexis would follow T.J. to his mother's home, where the children were supposed to stay for the night. The exchange was calm, brief, almost mechanical. Alexis helped the children out of her car. They climbed into T.J.'s. There were no arguments. No raised voices. Nothing about the scene hinted that it would be the last time anyone would see her alive. When both cars left the parking lot, Alexis followed behind him, keeping her headlights steady in his rearview mirror. They headed south along Highway 29. But somewhere along the route, that pattern broke. Alexis's car began to gain speed, eventually overtaking TJ's vehicle. And then, without warning, she took off, accelerating down the road until her taillights vanished into the darkness. TJ later told investigators that he assumed she'd changed her mind about following him, that maybe she decided to drive home instead. But when Alexis failed to answer his calls and didn't return messages that night, unease turned into alarm. By morning, the unease had spread to her family. Alexis wasn't responding to anyone. Not that she was found, but that her car had been. And for anyone who knows the rhythm of true crime stories, that distinction is devastating. The vehicle was towed and examined. Every inch of it was photographed. Investigators noted how personal belongings, things people almost never leave behind, were all still there. Her phone alone should have been a digital map of her last movements. But it, too, offered little help. There were no recent texts that raised alarm, no calls that pinpointed a threat, just a sudden, inexplicable silence. The location of the car only deepened the mystery. McCormick County was not on her usual route. It wasn't close to where she lived, nor near TJ's mother's house. To get there, she would have had to drive through a maze of rural backroads, the kind of paths you take only if you know exactly where you're going, or if you're running from something. Speculation began to swirl. Did someone follow her that night? Did she meet with someone after leaving the gas station? Was she lured there under false pretenses? Or did she flee in fear, trying to lose whoever she believed was watching her? Every theory felt both possible and impossible at the same time. As hours turned into days and days into weeks, the red car became the last trace of Alexis Ware's existence. The trail behind it grew colder, the clues thinner, and the fear sharper.
To Alexis, it had unfolded fast, precise, and in silence. And somewhere between that gas station and that dirt road, the truth had vanished with her. When investigators began piecing together the puzzle of Alexis Ware's disappearance, they were met not with evidence, but with silence. Every clue seemed to dissolve the moment they reached for it. What should have been a simple missing person investigation became a labyrinth of dead ends, contradictions, and an eerie sense that someone, somewhere, knew more than they were saying. The initial focus was on the car. The red Honda Accord had been carefully examined, fingerprints lifted, photographs taken, and items cataloged. But the prints belonged only to Alexis and her children. There was no sign of an intruder, no visible indication of violence. The engine's coldness suggested it had been there for hours, possibly since the night she disappeared. The road where it was found was a narrow, muddy cut through McCormick County, an area Alexis had no known ties to. It was a place so remote that it seemed designed to swallow evidence whole. Investigators began retracing her last known movements. They studied footage from the 7-Eleven gas station, noting the calm demeanor she showed while handing her children to their father. Nothing in that footage pointed to panic or conflict. Then they tracked her phone. For a short while, its signal followed the route she'd taken. southward, toward Abbeville County. But then, without warning, the digital trail went dark. The phone powered down, or was destroyed. Either way, it left investigators blind. They questioned T.J. Patterson, the last person known to have seen her. He described their meeting as routine, claiming that Alexis had seemed fine. When she sped off, he assumed she had simply changed her mind. Investigators combed through his story, his phone records, his timeline, his family's statements. In time, authorities would publicly state that he was not considered a suspect. But among Alexis's friends and online followers, doubts persisted. How could a woman vanish just minutes after meeting someone she knew, and no one see anything? Detectives interviewed everyone who'd spoken to her in the days before she vanished. Friends, family, co-workers, acquaintances. They all said the same thing, that Alexis had been acting paranoid, afraid of being followed, certain she was in danger. But no one could identify who she believed was watching her. There were no clear threats, no known enemies, no official reports filed before her disappearance. Her fear existed only in fragments, text messages, stray comments, worried glances. Then there was the car's location. It was found nearly 70 miles away from the gas station, down an unpaved road surrounded by woods. To reach that spot, she would have had to navigate multiple turns through unfamiliar rural terrain. There were no cameras along that stretch, no houses nearby, no witnesses who reported seeing a car pull in that night. The discovery felt intentional, as though whoever left the vehicle there wanted it hidden, but not too well hidden. A car placed just close enough to be found eventually, but far enough to delay answers. Investigators theorized several possibilities. 1. Alexis drove herself there, fleeing something or someone. 2. She was forced there by another person, possibly under duress. 3. The car was staged, left by someone who wanted to mislead authorities about where she had gone. Each theory led to more questions, and none produced solid proof. Search teams were deployed across McCormick County. Volunteers combed wooded trails, fields, and shallow creeks. Drones were launched. 9 units followed faint scents that disappeared near the roadside. Nothing. Not a shoe. Not a strand of hair. Not a single piece of verifiable evidence indicating what happened after that car stopped moving. The lack of progress became unbearable for her family. Alexis's mother, Althea, pushed relentlessly, pleading for the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, SLED, to take over the case. But because Alexis's disappearance didn't initially meet the criteria for state involvement, the investigation remained primarily in the hands of local authorities. That jurisdictional gap between small-town resources and the scope of a case that might have crossed county lines would later become one of the most painful obstacles her family faced. Days turned into weeks. The search lost momentum. Online, the story gained traction. True crime communities began dissecting every detail, every inconsistency, every statement released to the media. Some speculated Alexis had been abducted by someone she knew. Others suggested she'd gone into hiding. A few, less convinced by either theory, believed the truth was more complex, that her disappearance was connected to something larger, something systemic that no one dared to name. Forensic results offered little comfort. The car's contents showed no signs of blood or struggle. The fingerprints were inconclusive beyond her own. Her phone's final ping came from a tower miles away from the car, somewhere between Anderson and McCormick County, before it went dark completely. It was as if the signal, like Alexis herself, had simply vanished into thin air. In time, the official search slowed, but her mother refused to stop. She coordinated with volunteers, printed flyers, hired private investigators, and organized vigils to keep Alexis's name alive. Each new report, each rumor, brought a surge of hope that was almost immediately crushed by disappointment. Authorities confirmed tips, chased leads, and returned again and again to that dirt road, each time leaving with more questions than answers. The more investigators learned, the less they understood. There was no evidence of robbery, no motive for voluntary disappearance, and no indication of foul play that could hold up in court. It was as if Alexis had stepped into the night and dissolved into it. But for her family, silence wasn't closure, it was torture. They knew someone knew something. They just didn't know who. And as months turned into years, the investigation became less about finding Alexis alive and more about finding the truth of what happened to her after that final drive into the dark. There would be no courtroom drama in the story of Alexis Ware. No defendant led in handcuffs. No prosecutor pacing the floor, recounting her final hours to a jury. No sentence handed down that could give her family even a sliver of peace. Instead, what followed her disappearance was the slow suffocation of a case caught between jurisdictions and silence. A story where the absence of justice became the crime itself. By the time the first anniversary of her disappearance arrived, the investigation had stalled. There were no arrests, no suspects, and no tangible progress to present to the public. Local law enforcement continued to insist the case was open, but privately, family members began to feel that open had become another word for unsolved. In 2023, South Carolina's State Law Enforcement Division, or SLED, confirmed that it had been consulted on parts of the case, but it had not taken full control. The reason was bureaucratic. State investigators could only step in if invited by the county sheriff or if clear evidence of foul play existed. Neither condition had been met. It was a technicality, one that would haunt every conversation about Alexis's case moving forward. Her mother, Althea, refused to accept that explanation. She had already spent a year begging for answers, walking the edges of wooded roads where her daughter's car had been found, speaking to journalists, calling detectives, and keeping the story alive online. Now, she turned her grief into advocacy. She began pushing for a law, a way to ensure that no other family would face the same paralysis she had endured. It became known as the Alexis Ware Act. The proposed legislation aimed to change one thing: the waiting. It would give families of missing adults the right to request that SLED take over a case if no progress had been made after a set period of time, often 1 year. It was born out of frustration, but also necessity. The system that had failed Alexis had to be rewritten, her mother said, so no other parent would have to fight for help while the trail went cold. Althea spoke publicly about the lack of accountability, about the way resources seemed to evaporate once media attention faded. She stood before microphones, holding her daughter's photo, that bright smile framed by dark curls, and pleaded for legislators to hear her. "We shouldn't have to beg for our children to be searched for," she said. Those words echoed through community halls and news segments, resonating with other families who knew too well the agony of waiting. In the years that followed, the proposed law began gaining traction. Local officials expressed support. Lawmakers discussed its merits. News outlets ran segments about the gaps in South Carolina's missing person infrastructure. Each story carried Alexis's name, her image, her smile, her haunting absence, as both a tragedy and a warning. Yet even as her name entered legislative debates, her case remained stagnant. There was still no trial, because there was no one to prosecute. No indictment, because there was no body. No closure, because there was no proof. The absence of evidence had created a cruel paradox. Without a crime scene, there could be no suspect. Without a suspect, there could be no crime. And so, justice became paperwork. Her mother's fight shifted from search parties to policy, from holding flyers to holding press conferences. The courtroom she entered was not one lined with jurors and gavel strikes, but one filled with lawmakers, their pens hovering over draft bills that could change the future, but not the past. Somewhere in South Carolina, Alexis's file sits in a cabinet marked Open Investigation. It is a folder filled with photographs, transcripts, and reports, but no resolution. Each page tells part of her story, but none of them explain how a woman could vanish so completely in a world mapped by satellites and security cameras. For Alexis Ware, there was no sentencing. Only the sentence her loved ones now serve, the endless waiting for truth. In many ways, her case became a mirror of the justice system itself, one where laws, logistics, and lines of jurisdiction move slower than grief. A system where the people most desperate for answers are forced to become their own investigators, their own advocates, their own voices. The Alexis Ware Act remains the only real consequence born from her disappearance, an attempt to turn pain into progress. Whether it becomes law or not, it stands as proof that even in the absence of justice, a mother's fight for her child can echo louder than any verdict. And yet, behind every speech, behind every promise of reform, the same question lingers. Where is Alexis Ware? When the official search slowed and media cameras packed up, The weight of Alexis Ware's absence settled over her family like fog that never lifted. The days blurred together. Mornings began with phone calls to detectives, and nights ended in the same cold silence that had followed every unanswered question. For her mother, Althea, time lost meaning. Each sunrise was another reminder that Alexis wasn't home. Each sunset another day lost to the dark. In the early months after her disappearance, Althea kept expecting her phone to ring, expecting to hear her daughter's voice, maybe scared, maybe crying, but alive. Instead, what came were updates that offered no comfort. Search teams had combed the woods again. Nothing. A potential sighting had been reported. False. A new lead had come in. Dead end. The cycle repeated until hope began to feel like punishment. But Althea refused to let her daughter fade into statistics. She printed flyers, thousands of them, plastering Alexis's smile across highways, storefronts, and church doors. Missing, the posters read, a word that felt too small for what had really happened. Alexis wasn't missing. She was taken, by circumstance, by something unseen, by a chain of failures no one seemed able to break. Her children were too young to understand. They asked questions that no adult could answer. When is mommy coming back? Questions that shattered Althea's composure every time. She tried to explain in ways that wouldn't scar them, telling them mommy had gone away for a while, that she was looking for them from heaven, from the stars, from somewhere safe. But she couldn't make herself believe that was true. Deep down, she still believed Alexis was out there. The community around them rallied. Candlelight vigils flickered across the upstate, gatherings where neighbors, strangers, and friends stood shoulder to shoulder, holding pictures of Alexis under the night sky. Prayers filled the air, but so did frustration. People asked why the search had taken so long to gain traction. Why state authorities hadn't intervened sooner. Why no one seemed accountable for the gaps that had let her case drift. In those moments, Alexis became more than just a missing person. She became a symbol of every Black woman who had disappeared and been met with silence. Her story exposed the cracks in the system. How quickly cases can stall when urgency fades. How families are forced to fight for the attention their loved ones deserve. Across social media, her name trended alongside hashtags demanding justice, reminding the world that she wasn't forgotten. As months turned to years, the emotional toll deepened. Her mother aged in grief. Friends struggled to talk about her in the past tense. For the children she left behind, birthdays became reminders of absence rather than celebration. Each year without answers was another wound reopened, another holiday with an empty seat, another headline promising new leads that never came. But the pain didn't just belong to her family. It spread through South Carolina's communities, through people who saw themselves in her story, through mothers who recognized her fear, through daughters who shared her ambitions. Alexis's disappearance wasn't just a tragedy. It was a reflection of how easily women can vanish without the world stopping to notice. Yet, amid the despair, something powerful took root, a resilience that refused to die. The community around Althea refused to let Alexis's case grow cold. Volunteers continued organizing search efforts long after official agencies had pulled back. Podcasters and independent journalists took up her story. Activists began using her name to push for reform. The Alexis Ware Act became not just legislation, but a movement, one that carried her legacy forward even in her absence. Althea found purpose in that fight. When grief threatened to swallow her, she spoke publicly about her daughter, not as a victim, but as a woman who deserved to be found. Her voice, trembling but fierce, became a rallying cry for other families still searching for their missing loved ones. Through vigils, marches, and interviews, she kept Alexis alive in the only way she could, through memory and determination. And still, at night, when the world went quiet, she'd return to the same question that had haunted her since January 2022. Where did her daughter go? What happened in those final moments between the 7-Eleven and that dirt road? There are no answers, only echoes. But for every unanswered question, there is a promise that Alexis Ware's name will not be forgotten. That her children will one day know their mother's story didn't end in silence, but in the voices that rose up to speak for her. In South Carolina, the vigils still burn. The flyers may fade, but the faces on them do not. Because behind every missing person is a family still standing in the doorway, waiting for the sound of footsteps that never come. And in that waiting, the true cost of this story is written, not in evidence, but in endurance, not in justice, but in love that refuses to die. The red Honda Accord still lingers in the collective memory, its doors shut, its engine silent, its story unfinished. It sits not just as evidence, but as a monument to the unanswered. Somewhere between Anderson and McCormick County, Alexis Ware's life met the edge of a mystery and disappeared into it. Years later, the questions have not dimmed. If she ran, what was she running from? If someone took her, who and why? And if she's gone forever, where is she now? These questions echo louder than the wind that once brushed against the trees where her car was found. They've become the haunting rhythm of a story that refuses to end. The investigation remains open, though time has done what time always does, eroding urgency, softening headlines, and burying details beneath newer tragedies. But in the corners of South Carolina, her name still carries weight. Alexis Ware. It's spoken in prayer circles, whispered in vigils, shared across screens. It's not just a name now. It's a promise, a demand that justice never sleep. Her mother, Althea, continues to fight. Some nights, she dreams of her daughter, laughing the way she used to. Other nights, she wakes before dawn, her heart racing with the same dread that began the day Alexis vanished. Hope and grief have become the same language. One keeps her alive, the other keeps her fighting. And for those who follow true crime, for those who've watched this story unfold, Alexis's case stands as a reflection of something larger. A reminder that justice is not always swift, and truth is not always visible. It challenges us to look beyond the sensational, beyond the footage and headlines, and to see the human being lost beneath it all, a mother, a daughter, a dreamer, who simply wanted safety, love, and a future. There's an unease that comes from stories like this, an invisible weight that lingers long after the video fades to black. Because deep down, we all know what makes Alexis Ware's disappearance so terrifying isn't just what happened to her. It's that it could happen to anyone. A single night, a single drive, a single decision, and everything can vanish. Somewhere, someone knows what happened. Someone remembers something, a sound, a face, a direction. Someone has carried a secret for far too long. And maybe that's the most haunting part, that the truth is out there, hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone brave enough to speak it. Until then, Alexis Ware remains both everywhere and nowhere, frozen between reality and rumor, between hope and heartbreak. Her story asks one simple, impossible question. How can a person so full of life just disappear without a trace? Maybe, someday, that question will have an answer. But until then, her name stands for every woman still missing, every family still waiting, every truth still buried beneath silence. This is not the end of her story. It's the beginning of remembrance. If you were moved by Alexis's story, if you believe her name deserves answers, share her story. Someone, somewhere, might hold the piece that finally brings her home. Like this video to keep her memory alive. Share it so her face is never forgotten. Subscribe to Sinister Tales for more true stories that must be told, because sometimes the scariest tales are the ones that are real. And as always, stay aware, stay safe, and never stop asking the questions others have stopped asking. Because one day, one truth at a time, we might finally find Alexis Ware.